Whereas adventure games had their heyday during the early 90s, the genre began to drastically decline in popularity in the second half of the decade. In a few years, the once dominant adventure games market began a steep drop that led to diminishing sales and a shift of focus from key players. By the early 2000s, there were only a handful of new titles released every year, and even those titles that made it to the market had very poor sales and mixed reception. There are several reasons for this decline, and in this third and final part of our documentary series, we will try to analyze them in order to understand why the once dominant genre fell from grace and eventually became a small niche in the video game industry. The advancement in personal computer technology during the 90s led to the adoption of 3D graphics in video games. Games like Wolfenstein 3D set the base for a new form of narrative where the player had a first-person perspective in the game, further enhancing the user's immersion and the depiction of the action on screen. Wolfenstein 3D is a first-person shooter video game developed by id Software, originally released on May 5 of 1992 for the MS-DOS. In Wolfenstein 3D, the player assumes the role of Allied spy William B.J. Blazkowicz during World War II as he escapes from the Nazi German prison castle Wolfenstein and carries out a series of crucial missions against the Nazis. The player traverses each of the game's levels to find an elevator to the next level or kill a final boss, fighting Nazi soldiers, dogs and other enemies with knives and a variety of guns. Wolfenstein 3D was a critical and commercial success and widely considered to be one of the greatest video games ever made. Garnering numerous awards and selling over 200,000 copies by the end of 1993, it has been termed as the grandfather of 3D shooters and is widely regarded as having helped popularize the first-person shooter genre and establishing the standard of fast-paced action and technical prowess for many subsequent games in the genre. It had numerous sequels in the years that followed the release of the first title, and it is a franchise that it is still active today. Immediately following its release, most of the id Software team began working on a set of episodes for the game, titled Spear of Destiny, while id co-founder and lead programmer John Carmack instead focused on technology research for the company's next game. Doom is a 1993 first-person shooter developed by id Software for the MS-DOS. The player controls an unnamed space marine, later termed the Doom Guy, through a series of levels set in a military base on the moon of Mars and on Hell. To finish a level, the player must traverse through the area to reach a marked exit room. Levels are grouped together into named episodes, with the final level focusing on a boss fight with a particularly difficult enemy. While the environment is presented in 3D perspective, the enemies and objects are instead 2D sprites presented from several preset viewing angles, a technique sometimes referred to as 2.5D graphics, with its technical name called raycasting. Levels are often presented in a labyrinth form, and a full-screen automap is available which shows the areas explored to that point. Doom is one of the most significant games in video game history, frequently cited as one of the greatest games of all time. Along with its predecessor Wolfenstein 3D, it helped define the FPS genre or first-person shooter and inspired numerous similar games, often called Doom clones. Doom has been ported to numerous platforms. The Doom franchise continued with Doom 2, Hell on Earth, and expansion packs including master levels for Doom 2 in 1995, and is another id Software franchise that it is still active today. The two key players in the adventure games market, Lucasfilm Games and Sierra Online, tried to adopt the new 3D technology in the genre, releasing games from their key franchises using three-dimensional engines. Grim Fandango is a 1998 adventure game directed by Tim Schafer and developed and published by LucasArts for Microsoft Windows. It is the first adventure game by LucasArts to use 3D computer graphics overlaid on pre-rendered static backgrounds. As with other LucasArts adventure games, the player must converse with characters and examine, collect, and use objects to solve puzzles. In the game, the player controls Manuel Manny Calavera, Calavera being Spanish for skull, as he follows Mercedes Colomar in the underworld. The game uses the Grime engine, pre-rendering static backgrounds from 3D models while the main objects and characters are animated in 3D. Additionally, cutscenes in the game have also been pre-rendered in 3D. The player controls Manny's movements and actions with a keyboard, a joystick, or a gamepad. Unlike the earlier 2D LucasArts games, the player is informed of objects or persons of interest not by text floating on the screen when the player passes a cursor over them, but instead by the fact that Manny will turn his head towards the object or person as he walks by. The player reviews the inventory of items that Manny has collected by watching him pull each item in and out of his coat jacket. Manny can engage in dialogue with other characters through conversation trees to gain hints of what needs to be done to solve the puzzles or to progress the plot. As in most LucasArts adventure games, the player can never die or otherwise get into a no-win situation. Grim Fandango received praise for its art design and direction. It was selected for several awards and is often listed as one of the greatest video games of all time. However, it was a commercial failure and contributed towards LucasArts' decision to end adventure game development. Lucasfilm Games shifted its focus to developing titles under their successful Star Wars franchise and later on focused on licensing Lucasfilm franchises to other developers. Sierra Online, sold to CUC International in 1998 due to financial struggles caused by the decline of adventure games' popularity, also attempted to recreate adventure games using 3D graphics. King's Quest: Mask of Eternity is a hybrid point-and-click adventure game and action-adventure developed and published by Sierra in 1998. It was the 8th official game in the King's Quest series, the first and only game in the main series where the main character is neither King Graham nor a member of his family, as well as the first in the series to use a 3D engine as opposed to the 2D cartoon or pixel style of the earlier games. The game combines a point-and-click single multi-purpose context-sensitive cursor from King's Quest VII and a variation of the standard adventure game item inventory along the top of the screen. The cursor is dynamic and can change into 4 different types depending on actions like look, take, talk, and do. The game was designed primarily to be played in third-person mode, but also offers a first-person perspective. The first-person mode was primarily put into the game to allow players to better look around or get close-ups of things on the screen. There are 3 difficulty levels for combat: easy, normal, and hard. Roberta Williams classified Mask of Eternity as either adventure or, within a possible new genre, a 3D adventure. As a 3D adventure, it retained a point-and-click puzzle system of traditional adventure games, but also included action-adventure elements such as avoiding traps and rolling boulders. Williams wanted to break away from the drawn-out animations and lengthy cutscenes typical of adventure games, which led to the player spending a great deal of their time sitting and watching. The game includes many actions and puzzles that could only be done in 3D, many based in physics like rock tossing, jumping, climbing, or 3D combat. The game was received favorably by critics, but it was a commercial flop. Gabriel Knight 3: Blood of the Sacred, Blood of the Damned is a point-and-click adventure game developed and published by Sierra Studios for Microsoft Windows and released in 1999. It is the sequel to 1995's The Beast Within, a Gabriel Knight mystery, and the third title in the Gabriel Knight series. The game's story focuses on the lives of Gabriel Knight, an author who is descended from a family that combats supernatural evil, and Grace Nakimura, a student who assists Gabriel as they become engaged in a case that involves tracking down a kidnapped infant by vampires that is connected to the Holy Grail and Jesus. The story is divided into chapters that cover a 3-day period of several time blocks, which play out in a linear fashion and places players in control of one of the two playable characters, while Gabriel handles the initial block of chapters most alternate between him and Grace. In each chapter, players must complete a set of required actions in order to progress the story, but may do so in a non-linear fashion, allowing them to explore locations and conduct optional actions that provide background and context to the game's story and events. In some chapters, completing certain actions will cause changes during that chapter in other locations. These are indicated by the sound of a ticking clock. Interactive objects are highlighted when the cursor is moved over them, to which doing so activates an action bar of verb commands that can be conducted by the player. Actions can involve things such as examining an object or person, picking up an item, or talking to a person. As with previous titles, players store items collected in an inventory and can examine them, use them, combine them, or make them an active object for interactions with other items or people. Conversations with people range from those who provide brief words on things and those who need to be interviewed on topics. Unlike previous installments, the game was fully rendered in 3D with a far greater level of puzzle solving and exploration, and featured a score that expanded upon some of the pieces used in previous titles. The game was the last to be published by Sierra in the wake of the crash of the adventure game industry, but was not a commercial success as its predecessors. Those two commercial failures led to Sierra, now under CUC International Management, to shut down its development studio. The brand remained as a publishing company, and one of the first titles published under the Sierra name was the immensely successful first-person shooter Half-Life. This also showed that the shift of focus from key developers as the adventure games genre declined was towards the new and emerging genres like the first-person shooters. The drop in sales of adventure games made the development of new titles financially unfeasible for studios and publishers. Each new adventure game required high production costs and large teams to develop, as the graphics, puzzle design, and voice acting were not cheap to create. As Laurie Ann Cole, one of the creators of the Quest for Glory series, stated, "They are just too art-intensive, and art is expensive to produce and to show." Studios found it cheaper to develop in-house or outsource 3D engines and create 3D models for the games, making the creation of other genres like first-person shooters less costly and hence more commercially viable for the industry. High production costs for the genre made adventure games also expensive with regards to their retail price. Gamers were asked to pay full price for an adventure game that, in combination with its small duration ranging from 8 to 15 hours of gameplay and lack of replayability, when at the same price they could purchase another type of game that could last longer and be played over and over again. RPGs, for instance, could require twice the time to complete, and by offering multiple classes to select, could be played more than once. The late 90s and early 2000s also marked the rise of multiplayer gaming, which in the case of adventure games was not present, further distancing the genre from consumers. As already mentioned, the success of Myst led to the creation of a huge franchise behind it, with multiple new titles being released after the first one. Along with that, there was a general shift of the adventure game genre towards the new subtype of puzzle adventures. That led to little innovation in the field and the drop in consumer confidence in the genre. Every month there was a new Myst clone in the market, basically copying on the success of the franchise and trying to capitalize on its momentum, leading to the market being saturated with low-quality puzzle adventure games. Being original and innovative was also very hard during that period. Computer Gaming World reported that a respected designer felt it was possible to design new and more difficult adventure puzzles as fans demanded because Myst had already created them in its early games. A better way to understand the negative impact Myst had in the genre can be provided by Al Law, one of Sierra's key developers, in one of his interviews where he stated, "I never understood the excitement about Myst. There were always many other games that were more interesting, exciting, subtle and funny, with better logic and puzzles. I grew to resent its success while better games struggled for recognition." However, more Myst clones were put out in the market every year, further associating that particular type of gameplay with adventure gaming. Each one of those games was received poorly by consumers and critics alike, further damaging the image of the genre towards gamers. By the early 2000s, it was almost impossible to convince studios and publishers to develop and fund new adventure games. Ron Gilbert, one of the icons of the industry, wrote, "From first-hand experience, I can tell you that if you ever utter the words adventure game in a meeting with a publisher, you can just pack up your spiffy concept art and leave. You'd get a better reaction by announcing that you have the plague." Tim Schafer took it a step further, stating that if I were to go to a publisher right now and pitch an adventure game, they'd laugh at my face. Though most commercial adventure game publication had stopped in the United States by the early 2000s, the genre was still alive in Europe. Games such as The Longest Journey by the Norwegian studio Funcom or Siberia by the Microids studio of France kept the rich classical elements of the genre and garnered high critical acclaims. Even in those cases, developers often had to distance themselves from the genre in some way. The Longest Journey was instead termed as a modern adventure for publishing and marketing purposes. By the mid-2000s, the adventure games were considered a thing of the past and a virtually dead genre. Most of its developers and key figures have left their companies and new titles were only found in the amateur scene. Key developers have stopped producing adventure games and have been sold, like the case of Sierra, or changed their focus, like in the case of the Lucasfilm games. However, due to the rise of digital distribution and the emergence of new platforms like mobile gaming, there is a small rebirth taking place. Old franchises find their way in modern platforms and computers through platforms like GOG.com, Steam, iOS and Android marketplaces, and even consoles like the PlayStation, Xbox and the Nintendo Switch. With the introduction of crowdfunding, old and new developers launch campaigns to remake or progress long-forgotten franchises. For example, new Larry games have been released in the last couple of years, although they are being developed by other studios with no involvement by their original creators. Moreover, there are still some indie developers who produce new adventure games, like the case of Daedalic Entertainment with their Deponia series. Time will only tell if the adventure games will be rejuvenated in modern platforms or if the genre will return to oblivion where it dropped during its decline. I try to present a thorough history of the birth and rise of the genre along with the reasons it declined. I hope you have enjoyed this documentary on the rise and fall of the adventure games. If you did, don't forget to support the channel by subscribing and pressing the like button. We will continue our exploration of our beloved adventure games by focusing on documentaries behind specific key franchises. Thank you all for watching.